Arguably South Africa's biggest corporate scandal. Now, Magda Wierzycka is the Chief Executive Officer of the Signia Group. You will know that she is an outspoken critic of fraud and corruption in government. But her thoughts now on the prevalence in the private sector, joining us via Skype. Good afternoon to you and welcome. You're well known for leading a vanguard action against corruption, particularly in the public sector in South Africa. In the private sector, though, I'm sure you'd concede we have just as big a problem.
Oh, yes. In fact, I've been very vocal about the fact that corruption is an equal opportunity player and that it affects both the public and the private sector equally. Because remember that for every public sector rigged tender, there was a private sector participant more than willing to pay. So I criticize both equally.
So is there an environment then that allows it to go unchecked, again, particularly in the private sector, and that nexus that you refer to between government and corporate South Africa?
100%. So I think, the greatest, not the only bad legacy left behind by Zuma's administration is the fact that Zuma has made corruption an institutional way of doing business in South Africa. And because we're an emerging markets economy, like any other emerging markets, many private sector firms depend on government contracts.
But that's no excuse, though, is it?
In the private sector, we've lost the moral compass. We no longer differentiate between what is ethical business practice and what is, not ethical. So it's now all about money, and we need to reclaim that compass and that sense of, understanding that certain things are morally and legally not correct, not even in the pursuit of money.
Is it too late then to find that moral compass that you refer to?
It's never too late, but it won't come without a heavy stick. So what we need most importantly is a functioning NPA and functioning Hawks. And then it's essential, absolutely essential, that those institutions go after those blatant examples of corporate failure, such as Steinhoff, such as, for that matter, MultiChoice and the payments that they made to the Guptas via AN7 to influence government policy. Big examples need to be made so people in the private sector start feeling fear again. Fear is a great motivator when it comes to corruption.
Let me suggest that apart from a functioning NPA and Hawks, all well and good, elements within both of those entities also need to have the skill and capacity in order to investigate properly, given often that corporate collusion is a lot more difficult to pinpoint and prove than perhaps other more, how do I put it, more mundane types of crime.
Indeed. This is the biggest problem. So the problem with any form of corporate corruption, even when it boils down to, criminal action being taken, white-collar crime typically, on average, takes about 6 years to prosecute. And it's difficult to prosecute because, commercial issues are complex. And hence, I believe, and it forms the basis of something that, I'm doing with Helen Suzman Foundation, which is instituting civil action against, people implicated, starting with President Zuma in the state capture of Eskom in particular. But it's actually almost, essential that there are some civil actions that are taken against, for instance, Steinhoff in South Africa, because, and this comes from my knowledge of, the civil case that we're running on the Eskom side, the burden of proof in civil cases is much lower than in criminal cases, and that's important, in white-collar crime. And the timeline taken is much shorter than it is with a criminal case run by an NPA and the Hawks. So I think it will be critical that what we do see is that the emergence of civil actions against Steinhoff and Steinhoff's directors, as an example.
But often there's not the appetite for that because, as you've correctly said, it's a very expensive avenue to pursue. So we then fall back into the realm of deal making, which isn't satisfactory, surely.
you know, it is an expensive avenue to pursue, but not as expensive as the billions that have been lost. So, for instance, if one looks, again, I'm just using Steinhoff because you ran with the Steinhoff story. But given the fact that Markus Jooste was allowed to siphon off billions out of his private companies, and those billions are sitting in bank accounts, you know, a court case might cost you 15 million rand. But, you know, if you've got the ability to then potentially recover $1 billion, it's worth running as a civil case.
But to your earlier point, often that requires a lot more bravery and coupled with a little more fear, maybe, huh?
You know what we need, for instance, PIC, as a majority, or a big, not a majority, but a big shareholder in Steinhoff, to institute that action. I'm quite sure that, for instance, asset managers such as ourselves, on behalf of our clients, will join that action. And, you know, would be very happy to cover some of the costs, because I think examples need to be made. Without those examples, I think it will take us much longer to reclaim, you know, that kind of corporate moral compass that I was talking about.
Do you really believe clients of a big asset management organization would be prepared to do that? Are they not more concerned about their own portfolio than the greater good?
Well, it's not the clients. I think the clients are more than willing to see their asset managers put, you know, their money where their mouth is. But when you actually consider the fact that a lot of money has been levied in management fees.
Okay, I think we are going to leave it there. We seem to have lost that connection via Skype. But from the Signia Group, Magda Wierzycka, thank you very much for joining us. Apologies there for the quick breakdown. Now,